Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories.
When I bought my house in 2015, nestled in a cozy corner of a cul-de-sac, I thought I'd found my dream home. It was quiet, the neighbors seemed friendly enough, and I figured paying $1,100 a year in HOA fees would save me from a lot of hassle. Sure, the exterior fence bordering my yard was old and weathered, but the HOA was responsible for maintaining it. That's what the paperwork said, and that's what the real estate agent assured me. I didn't think much of it at the time. Big mistake. Fast forward to this year, and I get a notice from the HOA that blindsided me. They announced out of nowhere that the exterior fence was no longer their responsibility. Just like that. No meeting, no vote, no discussion. The fence, which stretches about 500 feet along my property and looks like it's one good storm away from collapsing, was now my problem. The rest of the neighborhood, especially the interior homes, didn't seem to care. Why would they? The fence didn't affect their lives, their yards, or their wallets. But for me, it was a gut punch. I remember sitting in my living room, staring at the notice in disbelief. The HOA had promised to replace that fence. They'd said it at meetings, sent out emails, and even included it in one of their annual budget reports. It wasn't just a passing comment. It was something we'd all been counting on. I had planned around that promise, saved money for other home improvements, and now they were yanking the rug out from under me. I stormed into the next HOA meeting, notice in hand, ready for answers. The room was packed with the usual suspects, the board members, smug in their folding chairs at the front, a handful of homeowners there to gripe about weeds or parking violations, and of course the board secretary who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. When they opened the floor for comments, I wasted no time. I'd like to know how the HOA can just decide, after 20 years, that the exterior fence is no longer their responsibility, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. This was a decision made without any input from homeowners. How is that even legal? The president of the HOA, a guy named Mark who had the charisma of a brick, leaned back in his chair and adjusted his glasses. The board has determined that maintaining the exterior fence is no longer in the best interest of the community, he said, as if reading from a script. The funds allocated for that project have been redirected to more pressing needs. More pressing needs, I shot back. Like what? Planting more flowers at the entrance? Putting up holiday lights? This is a 500-foot fence we're talking about. It's a safety issue, Mark shrugged. We can't please everyone. The rest of the board members nodded like bobbleheads, completely uninterested in my concerns. One woman, Susan, chimed in with a passive-aggressive smile. You know, you could just replace it yourself. It's your property after all. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It's been the HOA's responsibility for over 2 decades. That's how it's always been handled. You can't just change the rules because you feel like it. Mark gave a tight-lipped smile. The bylaws give us the authority to make decisions in the best interest of the community. I left the meeting angrier than I'd ever been. The board didn't care about fairness or responsibility. They cared about saving money and avoiding any actual work. The next day, I called an attorney. If they weren't going to play fair, I wasn't going to roll over. My attorney, Rachel, didn't mince words. This is textbook bad HOA behavior, she said after I laid everything out. They've been maintaining that fence for over 20 years. That creates an implied obligation. It's called estoppel. They can't just change the rules on a whim without a vote. She sent a formal demand letter to the HOA, outlining their obligations and giving them a deadline to reverse their decision. Predictably, they didn't respond. Instead, they started playing dirty. A week later, I got a notice in the mail about my lawn. Apparently, it wasn't up to community standards. Never mind that it looked exactly the same as it always had, green, trimmed, and well kept. A few days after that, they sent another notice about a non-compliant trash bin that had been left out. The bin wasn't even mine, it belonged to my neighbor. It was obvious they were trying to intimidate me. Rachel wasn't surprised. HOAs like this thrive on power trips, she said. They're hoping you'll back down. Don't. The tension in the neighborhood was impossible to ignore. Word spread quickly about my fight with the board. Some neighbors supported me quietly, whispering their encouragement when no one else was around. Others treated me like a pariah, especially the board members and their cronies. I'd catch them glaring at me during walks or shaking their heads when they passed my house. One day I came home to find a bright orange violation notice stuck to my door. This time they were claiming that my shutters were the wrong color. I laughed out loud. The shutters hadn't changed since the day I moved in. It was pathetic. The breaking point came when Mark showed up at my house. I was in the yard staring at the sagging fence when he pulled up in his shiny black SUV. He stepped out, clipboard in hand, and walked up with a smug grin. "Just here to document the fence," he said, snapping a photo. "We're keeping records for the transition of responsibility." "Transition of responsibility," I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You mean the responsibility you're illegally dumping on me?" He ignored the comment and scribbled something on his clipboard. "You know," he said, glancing up, "fighting the board like this isn't going to end well for you. Maybe you should reconsider." "Reconsider what? Letting you off the hook for a 20-year obligation? Not happening." He shrugged and walked back to his car. "Suit yourself." That night I sat down and wrote a letter to every homeowner in the neighborhood, explaining the situation and urging them to hold the board accountable. Rachel helped me draft it, making sure it was both professional and compelling. I hand-delivered it to each mailbox, even though I knew it would paint a bigger target on my back. The fallout was immediate. Mark called an emergency meeting to address what he called my misinformation campaign. He stood at the front of the room, ranting about how I was causing division in the community. I sat in the back, arms crossed, waiting for my turn to speak. When they finally let me address the room, I didn't hold back. "This isn't about division," I said. "It's about accountability. The board made a promise to this community, and now they're breaking it. If they can get away with this, what's next? Will they stop maintaining the pool, the clubhouse? Where does it end?" The room buzzed with murmurs, a low hum of unease rippling through the crowd. A few people nodded in agreement, their faces set with quiet determination, but most just sat there blank-faced and frozen, clearly too afraid to pick a side. It was like they were waiting to see which way the wind would blow before committing to anything. Meanwhile, the board sat stone-faced, their stubbornness practically radiating off them. Instead of addressing the concerns or even attempting a compromise, they doubled down, repeating the same excuses they'd been using all along. They refused to take even a shred of responsibility for the fence, as if saying it enough times would make it true. The tension in the room thickened, but the board didn't flinch. It was like they'd decided that standing their ground, no matter how wrong they were, was the only way to come out of this looking like they had any control left. As of now, Rachel has filed a lawsuit against the HOA, and the case is moving forward. The board is dragging their feet, hoping I'll give up, but that's not going to happen. This fence might be falling apart, but I'm not. I'll keep you posted. The lawsuit dragged on longer than I expected. The HOA did everything in their power to stall, filing pointless motions and claiming they needed more time to gather evidence. Rachel warned me this was a common tactic, dragging things out in hopes I'd get tired or run out of money. But I wasn't backing down. When we finally got to mediation, it was a circus. The board showed up with their attorney, a sleazy guy who looked like he'd crawled out of a law school brochure from the 90s. They sat there, smug as ever, claiming the fence wasn't their problem because it bordered property. Rachel didn't let them get away with anything. She laid out every instance over the past 2 decades where the HOA had maintained that fence, using their own meeting minutes and budgets as evidence. The mediator seemed unimpressed with the board's excuses, barely hiding their irritation as the HOA droned on about how the fence wasn't their responsibility. But as expected, they still refused to budge. They clung to their story like it was their last lifeline, throwing out weak arguments and hoping something would stick. Then came their so-called settlement offer. They'd cover half the cost of replacing the fence, half, if I agreed to drop the case entirely. The audacity of it almost made me choke. I couldn't help but laugh. A sharp, bitter sound that echoed through the room. "You've got to be kidding me," I said. But Rachel, calm and composed as ever, stepped in before I could say anything more. She didn't even flinch as she declined the offer, her words cutting and precise. The look on the board's faces told me they hadn't expected us to hold our ground. But Rachel wasn't about to let them off the hook that easily. When mediation failed, the case was set for trial. That's when the HOA decided to play even dirtier. They started issuing fines for made-up violations. One week it was for weeds in my flower bed, even though I don't have a flower bed. The next week it was for unsightly trash, which turned out to be my recycling bin. It was harassment, plain and simple. Rachel filed a motion to have their actions included as part of the lawsuit, citing retaliation. The trial date finally arrived, and the board looked nervous for the first time. Mark, who had always been so arrogant, was suddenly sweating through his suit. Their lawyer put up a weak defense, arguing that the board had the right to reassign responsibilities as they saw fit. Rachel countered with a mountain of evidence, including testimony from former board members who confirmed the fence had always been the HOA's responsibility. The judge didn't buy the HOA's argument. In the ruling, they stated that the board had acted in bad faith and violated their own governing documents. I won the case. The HOA was ordered to replace the entire fence and pay my legal fees. But here's the worst part. Winning didn't even feel like a victory. The board retaliated by raising HOA dues for everyone, blaming unexpected legal expenses. My neighbors, even the ones who supported me, started giving me the cold shoulder. Mark stepped down as president, but the new board wasn't any better. They found new ways to make my life miserable. Constant inspections, bogus violations, and endless letters about community standards. The fence got replaced, but the battle never really ended. It felt like the HOA was determined to remind me that standing up to them had consequences. The new fence might have been sturdy, but it didn't block out the constant stream of notices, inspections, and thinly veiled harassment. Every interaction with the HOA was a fresh reminder that they weren't going to let me live in peace. And honestly, it wasn't just the HOA. There was this lingering tension in the neighborhood. Like everyone was watching, waiting to see if I'd push back again or finally crack under the pressure. Every time I walked past that damn fence, it felt less like a victory, and more like a symbol of everything this place had cost me. Since you've won the lawsuit but the HOA continues to harass you, it's clear they're trying to drag this out and make your life difficult. Given the ruling in your favor, you might want to explore further legal actions to force them to stop. If they're still engaging in harassment, documenting each instance will be crucial for your case. Keep pressing for compliance, and don't let them intimidate you into backing down. Their refusal to follow through could lead to even bigger consequences for them. Since the lawsuit was successful but they're still harassing you, it might be time to consult with your attorney again to explore additional legal avenues. The HOA's ongoing harassment could open up the possibility of pursuing further damages or penalties for their continued bad faith actions. The court ruling should have settled this, and now it's about holding them accountable for their refusal to stop the harassment. Keep documenting everything, and let your attorney guide you through the next steps to make sure they don't get away with it. It's frustrating that even after winning the lawsuit, the HOA continues to harass you. At this point, you might need to consider filing a motion for contempt of court if they're blatantly ignoring the ruling. They're clearly trying to wear you down, but you can't let them get away with it. Keep detailed records of each instance of harassment, and consider taking further legal action to ensure the board is held accountable for not following through with the court's decision.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.